Hi, and thank you for joining us again as we continue our studies in the Gospel of Matthew. This week we're expounding upon what we started last week when we looked at Matthew 5, verses 17 through 20, in which Jesus talks about how he has not come to abolish or change the law of Moses, but rather to fulfill it. And then he begins going through several issues. We're going to break up this section into two parts. We're going to look at Matthew 5, 21 through 32 this week, and then we'll look at verses 33 through the end of the chapter next week. I invite you to read along with me now. You have heard that it was said to those of old, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment." But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever said "you fool" will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are still going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body go into hell. It was also said, "Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce." But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So, this week we are looking at three topics. We are looking at murder, adultery, and divorce. Each time Jesus is saying what they have heard it said before. And he's expounding upon the attitude that should be behind these issues. We start with "you shall not commit murder." That's one of the 10 Commandments. This came from God himself. But what Jesus tells them is that if they're even angry with their brother, they're guilty of murder. Here's the situation. If anger was under control, then murder would not even be an issue for them. You know, if you're trying to go through life, many of us don't say every day, "Well, let me try not to commit murder today." I mean, we maybe jokingly say that about people that irritate us at times, but when it comes down to it, we don't have to struggle against committing murder. But we do get angry. We do have hatred towards others. We do insult others. And so we have to stop it beforehand, before it gets to the point of where we're breaking the commandment. And so that's what Jesus is doing throughout this whole section, is he's expounding upon the heart and on the attitude and how it should be in line with the characteristics of a good and faithful servant. And then the commandment issues will never be a problem. In there, he talks about if we find ourselves that we have something wrong with a brother, we're to go to them and make it right. Oftentimes, we like to hold grudges. We like to just sit back and stew and get upset, and we don't want to say anything to them. We get mad at somebody, but we won't go talk to them about it. We want to keep it to ourselves. That's not how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be resolving our issues so that we can properly come to God together, so that we can properly serve together. A good friend of mine quotes something that I know many have heard before. "It's amazing how we can't get along here on earth, but we expect to in heaven." We have to treat one another right. We need to be considerate and caring towards one another, and we need to resolve issues when they come up. Secondly, he says, whoever lusts after a woman has commit adultery. He says, you've heard it said, "You shall not commit adultery." Again, another one of the 10 Commandments, something that God has told them. But again, many don't wonder if they're going to commit adultery today. They won't even think about cheating on their spouse, but they do lust after someone who is not their spouse. They do become carnal at times. And again, we have this issue that if the lust was under control, if the situations of life were under control, then the other's not even going to be an issue. It's not even going to be a figment of our mind. Am I struggling with this or not? Jesus is teaching them to stop it before it gets to the point of the action being committed. Get your heart, your attitude right. And so he expounds upon these two commandments, and then he goes and he expounds upon divorce. And he says, you have heard it said that if a man divorces a woman, he shall give her a certificate of divorce. You know, they bring this up in his questioning about divorce in Matthew chapter 19. And they're going to say that Moses told them to give her a certificate of divorce. Divorce was never part of God's plan. It is an unfortunate part of our society today. It's common today. But divorce was never part of God's plan. Matter of fact, in the book of Malachi, we learn that God hates divorce. Marriage is something that has been intended to be in the sight of God. God ordained it. God put it together. God has brought these two individuals together to become one flesh. And yet, there are many people that divorce for whatever reason today, and in the time of Jesus. Divorce was never God's intention for the marriage, but God does permit an exception for the case of sexual immorality, adultery, in which one can get divorced and be remarried and not be in sin. God does not want what he has joined together to be put apart. And yet man, because man is focused more on self and their heart is not right, then they divorce easily. You know, if the heart was right, it would be like divorcing your own self. Because when you got married, you made a commitment to that individual. And the two flesh were to become one. You're putting off yourself, basically. You've done wrong toward yourself if your marriage has been true in the sight of God. The heart, the attitude needs to be right. And in this entire passage, there's a very key point I want to make. He says, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. Or if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Jesus is talking about how important this is. It is better for you to go through life maimed than to enter into hell whole. Friends, sometimes the choices we have to make, the attitude adjustments that we have to make, are sacrifices. Go against what we want so much. But it is worth it to have an eternity with God. Are we making decisions? Are we building our attitude appropriately so that we can be right with God? Or are we allowing our sinful pieces to control us instead? We'll stop here for this week. We'll continue next week as we continue our look through the Sermon on the Mount, a sermon that is all about getting our attitude and our heart right with God. Thank you for joining us this week, and I hope to see you again next week.